I want to welcome everyone to this month's edition of the Mathewson-Plank Virtual Book Club meeting. And before we get started, I just want to have a few announcements about the chapter. First of all, the elections for our officers will close this Friday night at 5 p.m. So if you haven't had a chance to vote, you still have time to do so. Secondly, if you're in the Lancaster area on June 17th, it's a Tuesday, there's two events going on. Lancaster Catholic High School down in Lancaster City is built on the ground where Rossmere Park used to be. And Rossmere Park was where, starting in 1925, the Harrisburg the Harrisburg Giants started playing their Sunday home games there, and they did that for 3 years. And on Tuesday, and Ted, tell me the time, Ted, because I'm not sure what time it is on when they're going to dedicate the marker. Are you there, Ted? No, Ted's not there. But anyway,
11 a.m. I think it's 11 a.m.
I was going to say around lunchtime, they're going to dedicate a marker to commemorate the fact that Rossmere Park was there, and the Negro League teams that played there. Also, later on that day at 5:30 at Lancaster History down President Avenue, there's going to be a screening of the PBS documentary, A Century of Change, which tells the story of how the Negro League teams were both an economic staple and a source of pride in the Black community. And after the screening, there's going to be a reception at 6:30, and then they'll break out into small discussion groups at 7 o'clock. And you have to register for this event, and you can do that at lancasterhistory.org. Also, I want you to save the date, July 20th. It's a Saturday. I'm sorry, it's a Sunday. Sunday, July 20th. We're going to go to a ball game out in York to see the York Revolution play the Hagerstown Flying Boxcars. And the people at the Keystone Baseball Club of Harrisburg, which is a vintage baseball team, will be doing a pre-game presentation of how baseball was played in the 1864s, in 1864. And they've invited us to come out and sit with them and their fans in the group section. We'll be out there in left field behind the visiting team's bullpen, from what I understand. I don't have all the details, but they will be getting to me shortly. And when I get the information, I'll get it out to everyone. My understanding is the tickets are going to go through them to the York Revolution, so we won't be sending tickets off individually, trying to get them on your own. We'll get a block together. So when I get more information, it'll be Sunday, July 20th, the York Revolution. And lastly, the summer edition of the chapter's newsletter will be sent out next month. Scott's in the process of putting that together. Any word on that, Scott? Anything you want to add?
We'll take some more articles if anybody's willing to submit an article for publication, and we got about a month yet. So the next 30 days, if you have something, let me know.
Okay. Well, getting down to business. Tonight, we have a guest with us, John Miller. John's a SABR member and an author who wrote the book, The Last Manager, How Earl Weaver Tricked, Tormented, and Reinvented Baseball. And hopefully you've all gotten a chance to read it. And if you haven't, pick it up because it's a great read. And just to give you a little, there you go. Thanks, RJ. Hold that up. I think Jeff was trying to get a peek at it. Just to give you a little bio information on John. John was born in Belgium after his parents moved there from Maryland in the 1970s. And as a young boy, John would travel up to 90 minutes each way on public transportation to play baseball in leagues that were run by other Americans who were living in Belgium. And excuse me. And during this time, his relatives back in Maryland were sending him books about the Orioles, including the books that were by Earl Weaver. He eventually wound up managing two Brussels Little League teams into the Little League World Series qualifying tournaments in Europe. And later, he also scouted for the Baltimore Orioles. John wrote for the Wall Street Journal for 13 years. And during that time, he reported from 6 different continents and over 40 different countries. He's written for Time Magazine, NPR, and the Baltimore Sun. And he's currently a contributing writer for America Magazine. He also is the co-director of a PBS documentary called Moundsville, which is about a small town located about 70 miles southwest of Pittsburgh, I believe. And the name of the town is Moundsville. And it's available to watch on YouTube. And it's a very interesting documentary. I recommend checking it out. John lives in Pittsburgh with his family. And the book came out on March 4th. And with all the commotion and demands of his time for the book launch, 10 days later, he started the season as the varsity baseball coach of the Taylor Alderdice. Am I saying that right, John?
Alderdice, yep.
High School Dragons in Pittsburgh. I think the season's completed now. How'd you make out?
We went 14-7
Sweet.
in my first year after only winning 6 games the previous 3 seasons. So it was quite a turnaround. It was great.
Great.
You find a good pitcher?
We had 2 good seniors who were tired of losing, and all I did was point them in the right direction.
And who's the famous alumnus from the school, John?
Curtis Martin.
Larry Lucchino, the former president of the Orioles.
There you go.
The running back Curtis Martin as well.
And Curtis Martin, and the rappers Mac Miller and Wiz Khalifa, if you know your contemporary tunes.
Well, John, welcome. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. As I said, we have a couple of Pirates fans on board, and we're all waiting to hear the stories about Earl. I mean, what a character he was. So you have a presentation, so take it away, John. It's all yours.
Thank you. That was really a great introduction, maybe the most comprehensive. Did the stuff about taking the bus come from the other SABR talks? I forget.
I know I picked that up online. They actually said the bus and the tram.
Yeah, it's all true. Yeah. So well, before I get into the slideshow, I'll just say that when Pirates fans buy the book and ask me to sign it, I say, please enjoy this book about the 1971 and 1979 World Series. Earl was not a great fan of Pittsburgh. They stayed at the William Penn Hotel in downtown Pittsburgh, and he thought it was run down. And he said, the William Penn Hotel is so old, they named the guy after the hotel. That joke should land in Pennsylvania. And also, you guys are old enough to appreciate this joke, which is that when people ask me why my parents moved to Belgium, I say they fled the terror of the Ford administration. Because he was so boring. Anyway, yeah, so they moved to Belgium to play music. I'm gonna do the slideshow now. I'll go a little fast the first part since Frank already got us partway there. Let's see, this slideshow.
There's the little guy.
So the other thing is, my son was born on January 7th, so it's been really an insane year with coaching baseball and the book coming out. And my friends had this onesie made for him. Yeah. So if you know the Earl Weaver story, you know what that's a reference to, which is the famous Bill Haler hot mic. The reason itself can only be spoken, amongst grown-ups over a beer, not in such polite company. Anyway, so yeah, as discussed, I grew up in Brussels in the 70s and 80s. My parents were musicians. We lived downtown. I went to school in French. But the baseball was out in the suburbs on the military bases during the Cold War. And also in the wealthier suburbs were expatriates who worked for companies like 3M and Microsoft and Procter & Gamble lived and worked. And they ran this little league. And I'm 47. So my generation, all the American kids played baseball. And so we had a league with like 10 teams per age group. And we sent teams to Williamsport pretty regularly. The first girl ever to play in Williamsport at the Little League World Series was from Brussels, and her dad was my coach. And then in my 20s, I coached. And so we lost to Saudi Arabia in the one game. We could have gone to the really big tournament in Williamsport, but we won we won the European Championships for U15, 15U, and for 18U, and went to Taylor, Michigan, and Bangor, Maine. So those are the two championships referred to in my bio. Yeah, so as discussed, I love baseball. I couldn't get enough of it, and we didn't have a television, so I listened to Armed Forces Radio a lot, and then read all these books, and just fell in love with the Earl Weaver story. The Orioles were terrible when I became a fan in the late 80s. They won 21 games to start. So they lost their first 21 games to start the 88 season. And so this taste of glory in the Earl Weaver story was very compelling to me as a little boy. And I also loved just the whole character, the humor, the witticisms, the kind of the oddness of this guy, complicated guy. Also, the fact that all these great writers, notably Tom Boswell and Roger Angell, loved him and wrote about him all the time. So he had all these people writing about him, and I loved journalism, and I loved reading these articles in the New Yorker and the Washington Post about Weaver. So I was always fascinated by him. I joined the Wall Street Journal in 2004. In 2011, they moved me to Pittsburgh to cover mining and global metals. In 2013, when Earl died on January 19th, the sports desk, they knew that I was an Orioles fan. I briefly worked as a scout. And so they called me and they said, would you like to write his obituary? And as I was writing it, I was like, man, this is such an incredible story. This guy changed baseball. Why is there no book about him? Yeah, there's some books from the past, but why is there no book in the light of Moneyball? Earl's in the book Moneyball, of course. He's in all these books about the numbers game, all these books about the history of analytics in baseball. Clearly a transformative figure. Where did he come from? Where did his ideas come from? And that really planted the seed. And I left the journal at the end of 2016, and then I started looking for projects. I made the film, and then you know, to do a book, there has to be something new. And I was very schooled at the journal and non-derivative reporting and research and writing. Like if I'm going to do something, it's got to be something new, different. And so I started rereading all his memoirs and Earl's memoirs, and I just kept on finding these little details that when you flesh out and do research, you find all this incredible stuff. Like his uncle was a bookie, and it turns out was arrested for illegal gambling on baseball all the time. And if you just look at newspapers are digitized now, and thanks to SABR, but also newspapers.com and other websites, you can find all these little newspapers all over America, and just put in a name, and stuff comes out. So when I realized that his uncle was a mobster basically, and that this is the guy who took him to all the baseball games, that's when it became clear that I had a book, because there would be enough new things that a book would work. And baseball managers too in the 70s were incredibly famous. I mean, I give the example of the Playboy interview because that was a cultural signifier back then. That year, other Playboy interviews included Ansel Adams, Stephen King, Ted Turner, Yasser Arafat, Nobel Prize winning writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and Earl Weaver. That's how famous Earl Weaver was. His book was on the cover, or on the top of New York City cabs. And so it also speaks to this time in baseball history where managers were celebrities, and you'd hire a manager thinking, this guy can win us the pennant. He's so good. Billy Martin is so good. He's so smart. Gene Malk is so smart. We hire the right manager, we're going to win the pennant. And nobody thinks that anymore. And so I was really fascinated by the change since the 70s of having that era. And so I started to research a proposal to do a book and started to travel a little bit. So obviously Earl's story starts in St. Louis. The picture on the left there, the vacant lot, is where he spent most of his childhood. The house in the middle, that's where his family lived when he was a baby. So he was born in the house, I think, and lived there with his extended family. And the guy on the right is Tim Metcalf. So I hired a researcher to take, he was like a crime writer who loves, noir stories about gangsters in the 30s and 40s, Tim Metcalf. And Tim guided me around St. Louis to try to understand this world that is a vanished world. I mean, this is a world of crowded streets and taverns and bookies, and the mob. They're not really dropping bodies. They're more like running informal parts of the economy that are slightly illegal, like gambling, or in the 20s, alcohol. And obviously nowadays this is corporatized and legalized, and FanDuel and DraftKings will sell you the same prop bets that Earl's Uncle Bud could back in the 40s. But this was a different way of life. And I was very curious and fascinated to try to recreate it. So I spent a lot of time in St. Louis, and got to know the family too. The family gave me these photographs. Earl on the left as a toddler, looking like he's about to lay waste to an umpire even then, brow furrowed, looking very focused and intense. As a choir boy or a ring bearer for a family wedding, very amusing picture to me. He looks so angelic. And then the high school, where he went to high school, Belmont High School, a great American public high school, kind of like Allardyce, where I coach now. And I spent overall 2.5 weeks in St. Louis, got to know the Weavers. So on the left is Earl's grandson, Mike Leahy. He's also a musician who goes by Clownvis. More about that in a second. Earl's daughter, Terry, a great lady, very funny, has her dad's sense of humor and sort of puckishness. I loved her. And then obviously Busch Stadium. So on the left is Earl's Uncle Bud. That's a family picture who looks like he's about to sock you in the nose. And then, so that's Clownvis doing his act. And Clownvis was actually on America's Got Talent. And he sang Old MacDonald Had a Farm. This is 2010. And he was so bad that he got booed off the stage and got into a shouting match with Pierce Morgan, who was the judge. And when Earl died, he wrote this beautiful piece about how when I was kicked off America's Got Talent, I was paying homage to you, Grandpa. And he loved his grandfather. And Earl eventually came around to appreciate his musical gifts. So I went to a Clownvis show, and Earl's daughter and I were chatting. And at one point, Earl's daughter stabbed me in the chest, and she said, "I've been thinking about what my dad would say about what you're doing." I thought, oh my God, this is Earl's ghost is gonna like chastise me. I said, okay, Terry, what would he say? He would say that if you feel that this is something that you need to do, you go ahead and do it, but you just make sure it's good. She pokes me in the chest. So that was even beyond the grave. Earl Weaver was coaching me and pushing me to do better. For all his complexity, for all his struggles with alcohol, he was a man who cared about quality, whether it was gardening or baseball. He liked things done right, or cooking. He loved to cook. And so I felt like that little interaction with his daughter was this little Earl coaching me to do the best I could. Another part of the story, so yeah, the bookie stuff. Once I dug into it, it became very clear to me that gambling culture was a forerunner of analytics. That in these little guides, I bought these on eBay for like $5 each. They had pitcher batter matchup data, strategies, methods for betting on baseball, and they would say things like bunting is stupid, or don't bet on teams that intentionally walk a lot of people, and sort of give insights that were very ahead of their time. And so I wasn't in the stands with Earl and Uncle Bud, but circumstantially I can say he spent a lot of time with the bookie, and then his strategies mirrored the strategies of bookmakers from the 40s. I went to St. Louis, beautiful old state archives, and the whole way SABR was very helpful, by the way, which is why I love doing these talks, because SABR is such a great organization and had all these great resources. And I just kept on building up the story. Of all the major league teams, the St. Louis Hall of Fame and Archives, I think, is the best. Like, this is Amy Barrett, no relation to Yogi, but she's the curator there, and she had a spring training uniform from Earl's only major league spring training in 1952 with the Cardinals, and more about that in a second. But she had the uniform, so I invited Mike, the grandson, and Terry, the daughter, to come with me to see this uniform. They had never seen it before, and we had a great time talking about Earl and reminiscing about that special spring training he spent in the bigs with the big league team. Obviously, I went to Sportsman's Park, which is now a youth center, and there's a little league field there. And again, just recreating the urban geography of 1930s and 40s St. Louis. So Earl, when he signed out of high school, and this is also, I grew up in Belgium, so for me, learning about this story is also learning about the story of America. And he, in 1948, when he signed, he could take a direct train from downtown St. Louis. There were 19 rail lines going through St. Louis, all the way to southern Georgia, which I knew there was some rail in America, but the fact that you could take a train from any town to any other town, no matter how small they were, is not something that was really aware of, and it was amazing to wrap my head around that and to sort of put myself in that scene. So it's a 24-hour train ride signed by the Cardinals for $3,500 or $4,000, and he and a friend took the train all the way to Albany, and they went to spring training, minor league spring training, on an old Air Force base. And after the war, baseball teams would take over all these military bases that were built by the U.S. government to defeat Germany, because they had bunks, they had athletic fields, they had all these things that an army and a sports team have in common to need. So that was Earl's first spring training. And so Terry, when I went to the St. Louis to meet with her and to see this uniform, she brought along some mementos, and this is stuff her dad left her. And along with this ring from like the '69 American League Championship Series was also these box scores. And Earl was so proud of these lineups where he was batting leadoff ahead of Stan Musial, and Eno Slaughter have been his childhood heroes. And so, yeah, after that first spring in Georgia, he played 4 minor league years, so 48, 49, 50, 51, and he was team MVP three times. His teams always won. They won pennants. Had a great batting eye, drew a lot of walks, didn't strike out a lot, uh, played good defense. He just was very slow and didn't have a very good arm. And so that's what part of what would eventually doom him. But that's what got him the hitting ability and the good eye and the defense, the good hands. That got him called up to again Major League Spring Training in '52, where he hit 260, hit a couple home runs, and got cut by Eddie Stanky, his manager, in the last week because Eddie wanted to be the backup infielder. And even though he was 36 years old, he cut 21-year-old Earl Weaver, and that's really when Earl got very depressed, started drinking too much, and started his long purgatory in the minor leagues. But again, this is top of the lineup. You see this Earl Weaver going 4 for 5 against the Yankees. I'm sorry, no, not 0 for 5, four putouts, 0 for 5 in that game. But Billy Martin is the second baseman for the Yankees, which is incredible. I think there were 7 managers who played in that game. And so then after getting cut, he goes in this long purgatory. And all he ever thought about was baseball. I mean, he married at 18, had 3 kids, and the first marriage was very fraught because he was never around. And if you the minor league in '48 had him fill out this form, and they said, "What else do you care about, or what are your other hobbies?" And he wrote none. And so he really was singularly focused on baseball. His uncle Bud got him off-season jobs, sometimes through the mob. Fixing parking meters where you'd work for an hour, then take 6 hours off kind of job. Um, and then in '56, he gets moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and they fire their manager, who was this guy, Dick Bartell, who was a big leaguer, who was very condescending to the players, didn't treat them very well, would do weird things like tell them not to throw the ball around the horn, and he was getting paid too much. He was expensive, and so the minor leagues were losing money. This was the time of the interstates and air conditioning and TV, and Americans were not going to as many minor league games, and so they needed to save money. And they hired 25-year-old Earl Weaver, partly because he was cheap, but obviously he attracted the attention of Harry Dalton, the Orioles. Um, I forget what he was. He was an assistant to Paul Richards and Jim McLaughlin. But anyway, Harry discovered Earl. And the whole time I'm traveling to these places. I'm sharing this because I want to give you a sense of the research and reporting. So Thomasville, Georgia was where the so-called Oriole Way was invented. It was an old military hospital. That's where Earl camped out. For 8 years, he ran Thomasville. And in the Baseball Hall of Fame, there's still a manual, an Oriole Way manual you can read in Harry Dalton's papers that comes from Thomasville, from Earl running these minor league camps. This is a guy, Melvin Corrin. His dad, Ken, built the so-called bird's nest, which is the room where Earl and the coaches would evaluate players and cut players. And they had a big Oriole bird with a hole in the mouth, and that's where they put their discarded beer cans because they would do a lot of drinking in the bird's nest because they decided the fate of people like Jim Palmer and Boog Powell and Brooks Robinson. Yeah, the archives in Thomasville were, again, I went there, and just really fascinating to learn. I'm a journalist, so I'm used to talking to people. So I've learned how to do history on the fly, and probably made some mistakes, but it was a fascinating journey to try to learn how to do this and just call up archives and say, "Can I look at your photos?" So I found pictures like this one of Earl from the '50s. So then he works his way up the Orioles system and ends up in Elmira in the early '60s, where he manages Steve Dalkowski, the famous flame-throwing lefty who drank too much and threw too hard. And Earl's only advice was just don't drink the night before you pitch, and just throw the ball down the middle. That's basically what he told Steve. And Steve had his best year for Earl until he blew out his arm pitching in spring training against the Yankees. And also, I'm fascinated by small American towns and post-industrial America, and this town used to make typewriters and fire trucks in Elmira. Earl, he lived in this little house on the right, which is still there. His daughter told me where to go, and I went there. And he met his second wife in Elmira, Mariana, who's still alive. And they used to go to the bar after every game. And it's also at the bar that he met Jack Crandall, who was this front office official who collected data on previous pitcher-batter matchups for the Pioneers. And and Jack died in 2021. And in his obituary, it says he's the one who gave Earl Weaver the idea for keeping stats on batters and pitchers, which is like the sort of breakthrough in analytics that it earns Earl his first mention in the history books. And people in Elmira say it came from this guy, Jack Crandall, that Earl met drinking at Moretti's, even though they both worked for the baseball team, but they got closer at the bar. Then after Elmira in 67, he goes to Rochester. And, Earl and Stan Musial died the same day. So it's sort of poetic that in Rochester, they're on the same steel pillar. They both played in Rochester. Stan's obviously from here, from near Pittsburgh and Denora, Pennsylvania. And he and Earl are linked as, fan and phenom. I mean, Earl, when he was a teenager, loved Stan Musial. Earl's dad did laundry for the Cardinals, so Earl was in the clubhouse sometimes and could talk to players like Stan Musial. And Earl, everywhere he went, is beloved. I mean, again, this is a very charming, colorful guy that everybody just loved, even though, yeah, he could be a handful, as we'll discuss in a second, and as Jim Palmer told me, sometimes intolerable. So then in Baltimore, Mike Gibbons at the Babe Ruth Hall of Fame has some Orioles stuff. And the Orioles, unlike the Cardinals, are not great about keeping records of their past. But Mike had this old uniform that has the pocket where Earl would put his cigarette. So you can see on the left, Earl was a chain smoker. He wanted to smoke one cigarette every half inning, very superstitious. Of course, umpires knew that that's where he kept his cigarettes, and they would try to jab him in the pocket to crush his cigarettes. That would be their way of getting at him. And Earl's response was to put his hat down on his head and called beaking the umpire. And all throughout the minors, I mean, he would do insane things. Like he got so mad the other team was heckling him in Georgia one night. It was really hot that after grounding out, he was a player manager in the late 50s. He took a right turn and charged the entire opposing dugout by himself, and they beat the stuffing out of him. He ended up in the hospital, and he never started the fight after that. But he had to make that mistake. He was knocked unconscious. There's a story in Peter Pasquarelli's book about managers, and obviously I don't know if this story is true, but it's written as if it were true, which is that after getting kicked out of a game in Aberdeen, South Dakota, Earl was so mad he climbed up the center field flagpole and watched the rest of the game from the top of the flagpole. And after the game, they couldn't get him down, and they had to call the fire department as if he were a cat. And that's according to Dean Chance telling that story to Peter Pasquarelli. More verifiably, he sat on home plate like a Buddha because he was so mad. He faked a heart attack, and the umpire said, "If you're still alive, you're out of the game." And he had these one-liners that would come back to the writers, like the umpire said, "Here, look at the rule book. I'm right. I can't read your rule book. Why not? Because it's in Braille." And the umpires coined the Weaver doctrine, which is you don't clean the plate off until he's in the clubhouse, because if he's in the dugout, he's coming back to kick more dirt on the plate. So that's the Weaver doctrine. Wait until he's safely tucked away and clean the plate off. And that was the reputation. And if he hadn't been such a winner, I mean, his record is extraordinary. He had a losing season his first year in Fitzgerald, Georgia. Then he had 26 winning seasons in a row, and then one losing season in '86 with the Orioles, and he quit for good. Because he was such a winner, that made him, unavoidable as they kept on promoting him. Even though they kept on saying, Earl, you're going to have to stop your shenanigans when you get to the big leagues. And for the first few years, actually, he did. I did an analysis of his ejections, and in 69 to 71, he didn't actually get thrown out all that much. It was only when they started losing in 72 or playing 500 that he got kicked up his ejections another gear. We can talk about that more in a second, though. Obviously, it's an important part of the Earl story. So the Orioles were not very cooperative. I went to spring training. When you cover corporations for the Wall Street Journal, they tell you if a company doesn't want to talk to you, just go to the factory or whatever and just say you're there, and they usually want to help you because they don't want you on the outside. Well, the Orioles were not helpful, but luckily Ken Singleton was, and Ken played for Earl and gave me all these phone numbers of ex-players. Super guy, really, really helpful. And I owe him a huge debt of gratitude, to Ken Singleton. Yeah, so Earl, he famously said, if I was an umpire, I would have thrown myself out of more games than I actually was. And he really had a temper. There was a darkness there. There was a real uncontrollable fury of an anxiety about losing. I mean, he was so terrified of losing that in '69 he had this incredible team, and in spring training he wouldn't play his subs. He played like Boog Powell and Brooks Robinson and Frank Robinson 9 innings a game, and they went like 19-4 in spring training. And Earl said, "I didn't want the people in Baltimore thinking Weaver was an idiot." So he had this absolute anxiety about losing, and that was part of why he would lose it with umpires. I mean, there was a little bit of strategy too. He would sometimes nudge the coach next to him in the chest and say, "Watch this," and then go out. And I think it's hard to convey to younger fans too how extraordinary this performance was, because Earl grew up in the age of vaudeville. I mean, the Cardinals teams that he grew up with in the 30s, they had their own cowboy band. And one of the glories of SABR is one of the a SABR convention. Somebody did an entire monograph about the Cardinals cowboy band from the 30s and what songs they played and what instruments. They would march from the train station to the hotel playing their instruments. They'd play on train rides to entertain themselves. And so it was baseball as show business. And Earl, I think he really got that baseball was entertainment. And he and umpires would go out, they would have their own like parts and repartee. And Ron Shelton, the Hollywood director, used Earl Weaver as an example to write the movie Bull Durham, and the scene where Kevin Costner and the umpire go at it. Um, and Ron told me that. And he played minor league baseball under Earl Weaver in the Orioles system. He loved Earl Weaver. And he said, this is leadership because it's showing that you care. So there's a whole chapter about the hot mic. And, I really loved exploring like what the, the background and the story of Earl and umpires, because it's such an important part of the story. And it's something that has been lost in baseball, that there aren't, this show is kind of, it's not the spectacle it used to be, because with instant replay, nobody's ever wrong. And so there's drama and human tension, human drama in somebody being wrong, which Earl in his Hall of Fame speech had that great line about how umpires made 2 million calls, and except for 96 times, they were right. And he got thrown out 96 times. So I also got to know different managers in Pittsburgh as they came through town. David Bell and Derek Shelton obviously was fired, but that was part of the story too, is to understand the context of the job of the manager, how it's changed, and to ask these guys about Earl's legacy. And all these people know Earl Weaver. His name lives on. The 3-run homer is still called an Earl Weaver. Anytime an umpire manager fights with an umpire, they reference Earl Weaver. And so I asked all these managers, how has managing changed? What's it like now? And these guys are more like middle managers. I found them very polished, like CEOs I used to cover, very smart and very with it, like able to, because they travel with like 85 people now. There's different trainers, therapists, agents who are always there. In Earl's day, it was 25 players, one manager, and 4 coaches, and that was it. And the managers were the absolute bosses. So the book explores like the change in the job over time. And I read all the important literature. Really recommend the Bill James book. There's a new one by Scott Miller, which is good. I've been reading that one. But my story is really about Earl, and I wanted to know what made Earl tick. Um, and yeah, also what's fascinating to me, I mean, he's this bridge character. I mean, he grows up in the America of train travel and vaudeville, and he retires in the America of suburbs and video games. And they actually hired him to make a video game, EA Sports, before they made Madden Football. And Don Daglow, I think is how you pronounce his name, who I met at a SABR convention, he's there, pictured there. And Don hired Earl, and they flew Earl out to Silicon Valley, and they had him like whiteboard baseball plays while chain smoking. I just love that clash of cultures, like Earl and the tech nerds, collaborating on this video game. And he didn't just mail it in; he actually taught them stuff about baseball they used in this game, which I thought was a great story too, and a great way to end the book and end the story of Earl and baseball. So this is a funny story. Earl's daughter, gave me a trip to St. Louis, gave me one of these statuettes, and I dropped one, so it broke. But it made the security had my carry-on, and it showed up on the security, and I snuck a picture over the guard's shoulder, and you can see the outline of Earl looking angry with his hands in his pocket, which I thought was pretty funny. Earl's ghost from at the TSA line. And Toby Mendez, the sculptor, I interviewed him for the book too. He talked about you can actually see the cigarette pocket in the sculpture. This is a replica of the sculpture that's at Camden Yards, along with the Orioles' other Hall of Famers. Yeah, and so Earl's legacy. I mean, it's people manage baseball the way that he managed baseball. Basically, I mean, they don't bunt, and they look for guys who can do one thing very, very well, and they try to build teams that have this collection of parts. And yeah, and that's why his legacy is relevant. And I should say one more thing, like he's arguably still, I think, the greatest manager of all time, modern manager. Since 1969, he still has the highest winning percentage of any manager with over 1,000 wins. Although Dave Roberts of the Dodgers will pass him when Dave gets to 1,000. So arguably still the greatest. And yeah, which is why I was able to spend so much time on this project because I never got bored. And then my son was born in January, and my parents and the baseball team made him this little onesie, and so that's all I got for now. But happy to talk more or take some questions. Thank you for your attention.
Anybody have any questions? If not, I'll start off with one. John, you said that the managers today are mid managers in
Middle
the
managers, yeah,
in the hierarchy of the
yeah.
teams. So the days of the old fashioned manager is basically done. Have you run into any examples of where this is filtering down into the minor leagues also, especially maybe at the AAA level?
Yeah, I mean, I do, to the extent that I reported on modern organizations, I mean, there is a move towards having better teachers in the minor leagues as opposed to ex-players. Like there's more college coaches now being hired. I have a friend who was coaching at a college near here, and he got hired by the Giants to manage a minor league team. But yeah, I mean the culture has changed. I mean Brian Snitker, the Braves manager, I said, "Do you ever yell at a player?" And he's looking out the field. He's like, "No, these guys can't handle it." He's like, "When I was in high school, a coach kicked me." So, I mean, something's gained, something's lost. Players are treated more, humanely these days. There's less toxic kind of bullying and anger. I mean, the stories about Jim Leland, people like that, like if a team had a bad game in the minors, they would go and they flip tables over. Bob Melvin told me, yeah, when he played in the minors, um, I think it was Leland or La Russa, like these guys would blow a fuse and they would be uncontrollably angry, and that was Earl's model. And sometimes they'd fight players physically. I mean, there would be a sort of a violent enforcement of team rules, and that's gone, and probably for good. But it still helps to have a leader. I mean, see the Orioles now after firing Brandon Hyde, it's clear they have this sort of leadership vacuum, and they don't have somebody to tell Adley Rutschman that he stinks when he stinks, and there's sort of too much power towards the players. I think so. That balance is hard to get, and I think now we're probably too much towards having, guys who can't really wield authority.
I had a
Jim,
question.
go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I'm sorry. How many of the things that you've learned about him are rumors, or how many things are facts?
Um, well, I mean,
Because you said he was unique.
he wrote 3 memoirs, and so, I mostly take his word for stuff. I mean, he says something and then I can check it and look at a newspaper. Uh, I would say there's 2 sources for everything in the book. I feel pretty good about the book, and for example, I was pretty clear about things like, his struggles with alcohol, where I decided if it happened at the ballpark, it was fair game, and if it was, written about at the time, or there was, more than one source, and it's at the ballpark, then it's part of the story. Uh, Whereas, like, if it's his personal life or even the DUI he got, like beyond that, um, I don't think it's a book that traffics in rumor. I think it's pretty firm, and partly because he was so famous back then, there was so much written about him already, and that's a question of checking stuff. I mean, he was not that honest about what a good player he was, which I think was very interesting. I mean, he would kind of dismiss it and say, I wasn't Red Schoendienst, or I wasn't good enough. But actually, he was pretty good, and he did kind of blow it when they cut him. He couldn't really handle it, and Orioles players would tease him and say Earl uh, is a terrible player. The only thing he knows about pitching was he couldn't hit it. And that wasn't entirely true. He had years where he had like 100 RBIs, and he was a pretty good minor league player for a while. And again, like when he faced some adversity, he didn't handle it well, and I think he was embarrassed by that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Jim has a question up in the chat. Jim, do you want to ask your question?
Oh yeah, Jim Palmer. Yeah, obviously that's an extraordinary relationship. And I think again for younger fans, it's harder to imagine how famous they both were back when baseball was a bigger, national pastime in the 70s, and the Orioles were on top of the baseball world, so on top of the American sports world. And there was a whole book about their relationship that Jim wrote called "Together We Were 11'9". Yeah, so Jim would tell me, he's like, sometimes Earl would just be intolerable because he would scream, and did not make friends with players. He was not, kind to players, but he didn't bear grudges, and he had a kind of an integrity to him where he only cared about winning. And so there was a kind of focus there that people like Jim Palmer appreciated and liked and needed. And when Earl died and Jim spoke at his funeral, he called it like a love affair. There was such an intimate bond between them. I mean, Jim's dad, he was adopted, and his dad died when he was 9 years old. He grew up so wealthy that he learned how to play baseball playing catch with his butler in Central Park. Earl grew up in the streets. I mean, it was schooled by a mobster basically, and grew up with a real rough around the edges manner and persona. And Jim didn't smoke or drink, and they were such opposites, but they had this weird chemistry that was very conducive to winning. I mean, it's what I think was striking too is that they were so open about it, and they would fight, and then each would tell the reporter about the conflict, which is not something that teams allow anymore. I mean, everybody's so media trained now, but this was like theater for the fan because they would know about the latest fight. And Earl on Father's Day would tape a sign to Jim's locker saying, "Happy Father's Day, now grow up," and things like that. Earl, I mean, he always wanted Jim to throw more sliders, and Jim was always worried about hanging his slider. But I mean, essentially, they agree on their core baseball philosophy, which was to, uh, stay over the plate, don't walk anybody, let your defense do the work. I mean, Earl's because the first half of his career, he actually bunted over league average. I mean, the real evolution was, or the real constant was his total belief in throwing strikes and incredible defense. I think that's the core of the Earl Weaver strategy. And that's what Jim Palmer believes too, to this day. Because I hear him complain about the Orioles not doing it these days. Is there another
Ted,
question?
you want to ask your question, Ted?
Oh, 70. That's a good one.
Are you there,
Uh,
Ted? Go
I
ahead,
can,
take it, John.
yeah, sure. I think 79. I mean, 71, they ran into Clemente, and there was a kind of inevitability. And there's it's those two series. I mean, I kind of defend Earl's record in postseason play because, true, he only won one of the four World Series, but the Orioles won 4 of the 6 ALCS they were in. And winning an ALCS is not that easy. There's also a lot of pressure. It's also October baseball. And they won 4 of those 6. His overall record in the postseason is 26-20 in games. And those 2 7-gamers against the Pirates were very close and really could have, gone either way. In 71, there was this famous inning. I think it was in Game 7 where Tom Shape, the Orioles put first and second, nobody out, and Earl bunted. So then he had second and third, 1 out. And then they got 2 ground balls. They were down 2-0. They got 2 ground balls and scored 1 run on the first, and the second ground ball was the end of the inning. So they lost 2-1. And so a manager who was famous for not bunting, in this case, bunted, and it may have cost him a World Series. Because if he hadn't bunted, then you have a higher chance, more run expect, or higher probability of scoring more than 1 run and tying the game. And then in 79, there was a similar situation where he had John Lowenstein swing away, and he grounded into a double play. And that series was very sloppy. There was lots of rain. Earl played Kiko Garcia, who was a good hitter, made some bad defensive plays. So I think 79 was a tougher loss because there was no Clemente. The Orioles had won 101 games, and I think that was more winnable. They were also up 3 games to 1, by the way, so they're 1 game away from winning for 3 straight games and blew it.
Anybody else have a question?
Yeah. John, one of the things that confused me a little bit, going back to those Oriole teams, Frank Robinson was one of their very best players. And, I really enjoyed watching him when I was small. And it seemed like, Earl really had a good relationship with him, but he was really quick to get rid of him for Don Baylor. And I'd like you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't really given a choice. I mean, Frank's salary was getting into the at the time
Is
was
that what it was? Okay.
it was like $140,000, and um, the ownership, yeah, basically said we have to trade him because he's too expensive. And in hindsight, it was a terrible decision. I mean, the Orioles' offense in '72 was so anemic, and they missed Frank Robinson so much, and he was such a great leader. But that's an incredible story too, because Earl, the environment he grew up in St. Louis, and then where he played in Georgia in the '50s was so racially prejudiced. I mean, Earl, used racial slurs and had a really, by his own admission, a very backwards approach to race. I mean, it was nothing to be proud of. But then when he got to Baltimore, he, by his own admission, evolved and realized that Frank Robinson was an important relationship he had to cultivate, and promoted him to be. I mean, he got him a job managing the Santurce Crabbers in Puerto Rico, and then he intensely lobbied teams to hire Frank Robinson as a manager because Frank wanted to be baseball's first black manager. And he's on the record. I mean, when the Senators hired Ted Williams in '69, Earl's in the paper saying you should hire Frank Robinson. He'd be a better manager than Ted Williams. And Earl, hired Frank Robinson as a bench coach in '79 after he had been fired by the Cleveland Indians. And this year, by the way, is the 50th anniversary of Frank Robinson making his major league debut as baseball's first black manager. In that game, he had a home run, and Earl in the papers then said, well, of course, and Boog Powell also homered for Cleveland in that game. And Earl in the papers said, well, neither of those balls would have been home runs at Memorial Stadium. But they were not like, drinking buddies, but they were respectful, and there was a very good rapport there. And all the Orioles black players I talked to, and even I didn't talk to Reggie Jackson, but in his memoir, Reggie says how much he loves Earl, and they just loved Earl because there was for all his orneriness and his crankiness, there was an integrity there where, like, Ken Dixon, who pitched for the Orioles in the '80s, told me, Earl called him into his office and he's like, you need to be the best pitcher you can be. You need to do your effing job. And Frank said, or Ken Dixon said, there was a kind of coarseness there, but there was also a respect of like, I want you to be a great player. And other coaches, white coaches would talk down to Ken Dixon and have a kind of condescending racist attitude, but not Earl. Earl was like, he was direct, he was blunt, but he looked at people like human beings. 69. Yeah, 69. That was very disappointing. The Orioles were overconfident, clearly, and got blindsided. I mean, with the 69 and 70 teams, though, it's still the only baseball team ever to win 108 games or more in back-to-back seasons. So I think still belongs in the mantle of all-time teams. But yeah, it's a shame. I mean, for me, it's a shame they lost that World Series. I know most baseball fans think that Mets story is great.
John,
Go ahead. Go ahead,
um,
Jeff.
did you have a chance to talk with Brooks Robinson while you were doing research on the book?
No, he passed away. I tried, but he was not doing well enough. The other guy who died as I was doing the book was Bill Haler, the umpire that is in the hot mic with Earl. Why do you ask about Brooks?
No, I just know that um, until recent years, he was very generous about giving interviews
Yeah,
and
no, I missed the boat on
and
that.
so yeah, I just didn't know when you actually started your research on your book and if you had had a chance to talk to him.
Yeah, I tried, and I was in touch with his I forget who was this like PR lady, but I talked to her, but it didn't work out. Cal Ripken talked to me though for an hour, and that was very.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, yeah. What did he say about Earl?
He loved Earl. He was the only player who would not share any stories about drinking or smoking. And Earl, I think for him was very similar to his dad. I mean, his dad also, Cal Sr., was also away from his family and also drank too much, had a DUI, and there's a lot of I think difficulty and pain there. I mean, Cal Jr., he said he didn't manage because his dad was never home, and in his 40s he wanted to be home for his children. And I think that's sincere. I mean, Ryan Ripken is in the Baltimore community and seems like a pretty well-adjusted, famous person's son. So I think, yeah, so Earl or Cal saw Earl as family. Earl knew him since he was a baby. I mean, Cal Senior was playing for Earl when Cal Junior was born. And so Cal Senior took leave from Aberdeen, North Dakota or South Dakota, and went to uh, be with his wife. And he was actually hitting like 320 when he left, and when he came back, he stopped hitting. And Earl used to tease him and say, "If you hadn't had that kid of yours, you'd be in the big leagues." But Cal Jr. did tell me, he said Earl and Dad would, this is in his words, Earl and Dad would hang out a lot, and they would go to the bar, and Earl would fire Dad, and then the next day he would rehire him. And maybe alcohol had something to do with that. Yeah, he was very generous, and I think he kept on saying, you don't understand like how empathetic Earl could be, and that's the side I saw. And I think that's true, and I think again, what makes Earl an incredible character is he contained multitudes, and he had a sweetness to him, unlike Billy Martin. Earl had like a sweetness to him. But he could also be cruel and yell and drink too much, and it was all in the same person. Earl played the ukulele. I learned during this project he loved poodles, and he loved to garden, and his therapy. So Mike Gibbons at the Orioles archive, or he had these unpublished interviews, tape recorded interviews with Earl, and Earl talks about how his routine in the morning in Perry Hall in Baltimore was to garden, and then he would do laps in his above ground pool with a snorkel, and that's how he would relax before a game. And he would garden and then do the laps, so with the snorkel going around like a shark. Uh, and he really loved gardening. I mean, sincerely, like it wasn't an act. I mean, there was something. I think, yeah, it's a depression thing maybe from the family. But that care for quality, I think, is very endearing. I think Cal was sensitive to that, and he really helped Cal. Cal had this slump his rookie year when he went like 7 for 60, and Earl stuck with him and really helped him get there. And, one interesting thing I learned too. So Earl always saw Cal as a shortstop because Earl had seen him play shortstop in high school, and he was incredible. He was so good as a defensive shortstop in high school that he was the starting shortstop his freshman year, even though he hit 065. That's how good a shortstop he was in high school, and Earl knew that. And so it wasn't that far-fetched to move Cal to short, even though it appeared to be, it shocked people at the time, but Earl always knew that he was a great shortstop.
John, do you
John,
see any managers in the future who will make it
Do
to
I
the Hall
what?
of Fame after? Well, Dusty Baker, Bruce
Oh,
Bochy,
yeah, absolutely.
Terry Francona, and probably Dave Roberts being the most likely managers to go in the near future. But after that, do you see that the manager being
Yeah.
a rarity in the Hall of Fame?
No, I think there's still a recognition of some people being better than others at doing this. And I mean, Francona is a good example. And I think again, the 2025 Orioles is an example of how you still need great charismatic leadership and what happens when it kind of falls apart. And I think, people who can make that happen and motivate young players. And Craig Counsell told me this when I interviewed him. He said, the part of the job that's not changed is that you still have these young athletes who are terrified of failure. They need structure, they need leadership, they need support, and that job is still the same. Another part of the job I think is still useful is, and David Bell told me this, is triaging all the information that comes out of front offices these days. So all the Ivy League analysts will pump out reports, and the manager, he's responsible for deciding what the 24-year-old, Dominican guy or uneducated baseball player is going to get as far as mathematical data to help him win a baseball game. And I think there's still real skill there, and I think some people are going to be better at it than others. And so yeah, I think there's still a place for great manager. It's just the job really has changed, and it's not going back in some ways. But baseball is also still evolving, and I think there is a lot of recognition of the intangibles and the chemistry of major league clubhouses being something that teams need to do better at.
John, I've always thought of of him as the kind of the reincarnation of John McGraw, although
Yeah.
they did overlap by just a few years. Spark plug, fiery managers who hated to lose, who were tremendously
Yeah.
successful, but brought a lot of innovations to the game at the same time. I don't know if you have thought about
Yeah,
that
sure.
or
And McGraw was in Baltimore,
No, yeah, obviously, and was an Oriole originally.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Earl, in the 30s, I mean, he said in his memoir, he said he would study managers. So I think he was probably, because McGraw probably retired in 34. He was probably too young to have seen him manage, but the spirit of those guys and the archetype and was something that he studied and I mean, he never said that was his specific role model. He was more Billy Southworth, who was the Cardinals manager in the 40s, and then Leo DeRocher too, and
Excuse
Frank.
me,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Go ahead, Karen.
yeah, it's not a very yeah, I don't think McGraw was consciously like his role model, but definitely that's the archetype that you think of for sure.
I have one question for you, John. It was easy having the Oriole orange on the cover of the book and the white lettering and Earl's picture. Was it unintentional or intentional to make the cover of the book look like a Wheaties box?
Oh yeah, it was intentional. I didn't obviously did not do the design. That was the Simon and Schuster people, but yeah, definitely 70s aesthetic and Wheaties box was what they were going for. I love it. I think it's an incredible cover. And
Yeah, it's great.
I'm very I'm very lucky. I mean, it's my first book, and the publisher at one point called me and he said, with the editor, he said, most first books don't work out this well. So I hope you appreciate that you're lucky, and I do feel lucky.
Any more questions for John? No.
John,
John, go
thanks
ahead.
for sharing this. It's been really fun.
Yeah, thanks guys. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
Yeah,
enjoyed the
thank you,
book.
John.
Are you
Yeah.
going to be in the Central Pennsylvania area anytime for a book signing or?
No, I live in Pittsburgh, so it's not far, but I don't think so. Where would be a good place to do that?
Lancaster, Harrisburg. I don't know.
Is there
You
a
know.
particular bookstore that you recommend?
Well, really, I go to ones over in the Downingtown area.
Mhm.
So there's a Barnes and Noble over there.
Yeah. Let me put that because I also I went to college at Mount St. Mary's in Western Maryland, which is not far from you guys, I think.
Mhm.
So I know they were talking about having me do an event there,
Okay.
so that I could double up. I am doing the Babe Ruth Museum June 14th on a Father's Day weekend.
And we be at the SABR convention?
I don't know yet. Again, I have a small infant, and I was away a lot in the afternoons, so I want to help my wife out this summer, and I don't know if that's going to be compatible, but I will definitely be at future SABR conventions.
Well, John, I want to thank you for being with us tonight. Reading the book, for me, just reliving the names in the book. The Orioles had such talent in that time period. Names that you just recognize instantly, but you maybe forgot about. And anybody who hasn't read the book yet, I I recommend it highly. And if anybody says to you, hey, have you read anything good lately? Recommend this book because it definitely was a great read.
I also recommend if people don't like to read print, the audio book is very good with the Johnny Heller, the actor, and it's available if you have Spotify. It's available, for free as part of your Spotify account, so people can listen to it that way too.
Well, again, John, thank you very much. I know you've been away from the little one for a while, and I'll let you get back to the family. But we appreciate your time. Thank you
Thanks,
tonight.
thanks, guys. Always happy to talk baseball. Take care.
Same here. Take care, John. Guys, up in the chat, Scott put a posting. Scott, you want to go over it?
Yeah, Dennis Snelling reached out to us, and he would like to be with us in August to go over his new book, The Whiz Kids. So Phillies fans will like this book. I just picked it up. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but we're trying to lock in a date. I'm trying to do probably a Saturday. He lives in California, so we'll have to maybe make it a little late morning, early afternoon.
And
But
that just came out the other day, didn't it?
Just came out, got released, I think, June 1st.
Yeah, we'll get this right.